He almost missed her. She was lying on her side in the snow, barely visible in the failing light of a January sky that had given up on the day and was letting the dark have it. Her pioneer dress was the color of storm clouds, and the snow around her had gone the same gray in the last of the afternoon. And the two colors had become one thing, and she had become part of the landscape the way a stone becomes part of a field after enough seasons of weather. He was off the horse before it stopped moving. His knees hit the snow, and he turned her onto her back with both hands, and his heart was doing something he had never had a word for. A combination of terror and purpose so complete that every other concern in his life became very distant. Her face was white. Her lips were colorless. The snow had dusted her hair and the collar of her coat with a fine layer that made her edges uncertain, as though the winter were slowly deciding to erase her from the visible world. She was breathing. Shallow, slow, but breathing. Her eyelids moved. Not much. Just enough. They opened, and the eyes that looked up at him were the exact blue of a Colorado summer sky, a color he had not been able to picture from her letters, and that now seemed so specific and so particular to this woman that he could not imagine having pictured it from any description. They found his face. They focused there. Her lips moved. The sound that came out was barely a sound at all, more like a shape made of breath. But it was recognizable. I knew you would come. He had ridden 3 days into a blizzard for a woman he had never met. This is the story of why. The letter had been read so many times that the paper had gone soft at the creases. The way old leather goes soft after years of weather and sweat and use. Jasper Calloway stood at the window of his ranch house on the evening of January the 4th, 1884, holding that letter in both hands the way a man holds something he is afraid to put down. Outside, the Colorado high country was buried under 3 weeks of unbroken white. The snow had stopped falling for now, but the sky above the Sawatch Range hung low and gray and full of promise. The kind of promise that means more is coming whether you want it or not. 3 weeks. That was how long ago Lenora Pemberton was supposed to have arrived on the Pueblo stagecoach. December the 15th was the date she had written in her careful, slightly right-leaning hand. There had been no hesitation in her words. No hedging, no soft maybe, or Lord willing. Just the date, the route, and one final sentence that Jasper had memorized the way a man memorizes a prayer he is not sure he deserves to say. I have come too far in my thinking to turn back now. I will be there. She had not been there. The stagecoach had arrived on the 15th right on schedule, its wheels cutting through 6 inches of fresh powder on Salita's main street. Jasper had been standing outside Polk's General Store before sunrise, collar turned up against the wind, watching the road from the east with an expression that Virgil Polk would later describe to his wife as a man trying very hard not to look like a man who cares too much. The coach had brought 3 passengers, a cattle buyer from Pueblo, a widow visiting her daughter, a crate of dry goods addressed to the hotel, no Lenora Pemberton, no young woman with fair hair and blue eyes in a gray-blue pioneer dress, which she had described in her second letter with an uncharacteristic attention to detail, as though she understood he was trying to picture her and wanted to help him get it right. He had waited 1 more week before allowing himself to admit he was worried, then another. And now, here he stood reading her words for the 3rd time today, and the cold feeling in his chest had grown from a small thing into something that filled the whole cavity behind his ribs the way winter fills a valley. Slowly, and then all at once, and then completely. The ranch house around him was quiet in the way that a house becomes quiet when it has been built for more people than currently live inside it. Jasper had put up 3 bedrooms when he broke ground on this place 10 years ago because he had been a young man then, and young men believe in the futures they are building. 2 of those bedrooms had known loss. 1 had known nothing at all. The walls were solid, the floors were level. The stone fireplace in the main room threw good heat, but there was a quality to the silence that even the fire could not fully address. The silence of insufficient people in a space that was meant for more. He folded the letter back into its creases and put it in the breast pocket of his blue work shirt, close to his chest, then pulled his brown leather vest back into place over it. The vest was worn at both elbows, the leather darkened by years of saddle work in Colorado weather. Ruth had given it to him the Christmas before she died, 5 years ago. He had never been able to bring himself to replace it. Some things that have been through the worst of it with you deserve to be kept close rather than put away. You are reading that paper again. The voice came from the staircase. Emmett Calloway, 10 years old, stood on the 3rd step from the bottom with a mathematics textbook open in his hands at a page he had not turned in 3 days. The boy had his father's build and his father's quietness, but he had his mother's hair, a color somewhere between wheat and early morning, and he had her way of noticing things that other people hoped they were hiding. Jasper looked at his son for a moment. I was. Emmett came the rest of the way down the stairs and crossed the room to stand beside his father at the window. He did not look up at Jasper. He looked out at the same snow that Jasper had been staring at for the better part of an hour. The boy's left hand was in his coat pocket, and Jasper knew without looking that it was wrapped around the small silver bracelet that lived there. Ruth Calloway's bracelet. The one she had been wearing when she died of fever in this house 5 years ago. The one Emmett had asked to keep because he said he wanted to have something that still smelled like her. The bracelet no longer smelled like her, but Emmett kept it anyway. You think she is not coming? It was not a question. Jasper was quiet for a moment. I think something went wrong. Those are different things. Yes. Jasper put his hand on his son's shoulder. They are. Emmett turned that over in silence for a while, the way he turned most things over, quietly and at his own pace. Then he said something Jasper did not expect. I do not think she is the kind of person who just stops. Jasper looked down at the boy. What makes you say that? Emmett shrugged. The carefully casual shrug of a 10-year-old who has an opinion but does not entirely want to be caught having it. The things you read to me from her letters. She does not talk like somebody who stops. Jasper said nothing, but he looked back out at the snow with something new in his expression. It was not quite hope. It was closer to the thing that lives just underneath hope. The thing that makes a man put on his boots before he has decided where he is going. That night, after Emmett had gone to bed, Jasper sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee gone cold beside him and the letter spread open on the wood. He had received 11 letters from Lenora Pemberton over the course of 6 months, beginning the previous June when she had answered the advertisement he placed in the Boston Courier. He had not expected much from that advertisement. He had written it because Hazel Pruitt had told him straight that Emmett needed a mother and that Jasper was doing no favors to either of them by pretending otherwise. He had written 4 drafts and crossed out the parts that sounded like he was selling something. What remained was plain enough to embarrass him a little. Ranch in Colorado. 1 son, age 10, no debt, not wealthy, looking for a partner, not a servant. Lenora Pemberton had been the first to respond. Her first letter was half a page long and contained no flattery whatsoever. She told him what she could not do. She could not cook well. She had never ridden a horse. She did not know anything about cattle. She was not certain she would enjoy living somewhere with no library within walking distance. Then she told him what she could do. She could sew and mend. She could learn quickly. She was not afraid of work. She had been managing her own affairs since her parents died of influenza in 1881, and she had not yet failed to find a way through any problem that presented itself to her. Then she wrote a single sentence that stopped him cold. "I will not promise you a perfect wife, but I will promise you this. I do not quit." He had written back the next day. He never wrote back the next day, but he had written back the next day, and the letter he sent was longer than any letter he had written since Ruth died. Over the months that followed, the correspondence had taken on a quality he had not anticipated. It was two people building a bridge from opposite ends of a great distance, each one laying planks without being able to see what the other was constructing, trusting that when they met in the middle, the structure would hold. Her letters grew longer. She told him about the cold winter light through the tall windows of the Boylston Street Library, where she had spent most of her free hours since she was 12 years old. She told him about her father's work at the county courthouse, the careful record-keeping of a man who believed that paper properly organized was a form of justice. She told him about the years after her parents died, the small rented room and the seamstress work, and the management of a budget that left no room for error and not much room for anything else. She told him these things without self-pity, in the way she told him most things, as a sequence of facts that had produced a particular outcome, which was writing to a stranger in Colorado about the possibility of a life together. He had read that final sentence perhaps 50 times in the months since. He was reading it again now in the lamplight with the Colorado winter pressing against the window glass. And somewhere in the space between the 50th reading and the 51st, the thing that had been building in him for 3 weeks found its final shape. He made his decision sometime around midnight. He did not announce it to himself with any particular ceremony. He simply folded the letter, put it back in his pocket, and began thinking about what he would need to pack. Jasper Calloway had learned early in his life that the right decision and the easy decision are rarely the same animal. What he was planning to do was not easy, but he knew with the particular certainty that comes from years of trusting his own instincts across hard country that Lenora Pemberton was out there somewhere in that white expanse to the east, and that she was not there by choice. He left Emmett at Hazel Pruitt's boarding house the following morning before the sun had fully cleared the mountains. Hazel was a woman of 55 who had been running the only boarding house in Salida for 20 years and who expressed her considerable affection for people by telling them difficult truths in a matter-of-fact voice before feeding them something warm. She received Jasper's request to watch Emmett with the expression of someone who had been expecting this visit for at least a week. "You have never met this woman," Hazel said. "I know her well enough. You know her letters. That is not the same thing. It is more than some men know about their wives on their wedding day." Jasper picked up Emmett's bag and set it inside the door. He looked at Hazel directly. He was not a man who made speeches, and what he said next was as close to one as he was likely to get. "I know what she is made of. The letters showed me that much." Hazel looked at him for a long moment, the way she looked at everything, directly and without blinking. Then she said the North Pass will be drifted to the eyebrows, and the Eastern Trail will not be much better. "I know. You could send word to the railroad depot in Pueblo. Ask them to check their records. That would take 3 days minimum. If she has been out in this weather 3 weeks and counting, 3 more days matters. Hazel made the sound she made when she was going to agree with something she found foolish. It was a sound somewhere between a sigh and a word that a preacher's wife was not supposed to say. Fine. Emmett stays here. You do not get yourself killed. She looked at the boy. Your father is stubborn. You already know this. Emmett nodded seriously. Yes, ma'am. Virgil Polk was next. Virgil ran the general store, and he was Jasper's oldest friend in Salida, a broad-shouldered man with a laugh that could be heard from the street. He was unlocking Polk's mercantile when Jasper arrived, and he took one look at Jasper's expression and went directly to the back room without being asked. He returned with 2 sacks of dried provisions, a sealed bottle of bourbon, and 3 heavy wool blankets. For the record, Virgil said, loading the blankets across Thunder's back alongside Jasper's saddlebags. This is the act of a man who has lost his reason. Maybe so. She could already be in Pueblo. She could be sitting in a warm hotel room right now writing you a letter about the delay. She could be, Jasper agreed. Virgil stopped what he was doing and looked at his friend. He had known Jasper Calloway for 12 years. He knew what Jasper looked like when he was making a decision that was not really a decision anymore. 2 days, Virgil said. If you are not back in 2 days, I am going to Sheriff Holt. Give it 3. 2.5. That is my final offer. Before Jasper mounted, Emmett appeared at his side. The boy had followed from Hazel's house without being asked. He stood in the gray morning cold with his hands in his coat pockets and his face set in an expression of 10-year-old seriousness that Jasper found almost unbearable to look at straight on. She did not stop, Emmett said. You are going to find her. Jasper crouched down to his son's level. He wanted to say something equal to the gravity of the moment. Something worthy of being said in the cold light of a Colorado January before riding into the kind of weather that had already swallowed Stagecoach's whole. What came out was simpler than he intended. That is what I am going to do. Emmett nodded. Then he reached into his left coat pocket and held out his closed fist. When he opened it, the silver bracelet lay in his palm, catching what little light the morning had to offer. Take it, Emmett said. Jasper looked at the bracelet and then at his son. Emmett, you need it more than I do tonight. The boy's voice was steady in a way that it had no business being at 10 years old. Bring her back. Jasper took the bracelet and closed his fist around it. He could feel the cool weight of it against his palm as he stood, as he swung up into the saddle, as he turned Thunder toward the eastern road. He did not look back at Salida as the town fell away behind him. He did not need to. He carried it with him. In the small silver circle of metal in his hand, and in the letter folded against his heart, and in the knowledge that a boy was standing in the cold watching him go, and believing with the absolute faith of the very young that his father would make good on his word. He had not come 100 yards out of town when he saw Silas Drummond. The encounter had been waiting for him like a stone in the road, and Jasper understood this even as it happened. Drummond was mounted on his big gray gelding at the edge of where the main street became the Eastern Trail, positioned with the precise casualness of a man who had chosen this spot in advance. He was 45 years old. Broad through the shoulders, with a dark mustache kept neat enough to tell you he spent time on it. His boots were immaculate. They were always immaculate. Drummond had arrived in the county 3 years ago, from somewhere back east with enough money to buy the biggest spread in Chaffee County, and the patience of someone who planned acquisitions carefully. Calloway. Drummond's voice was pleasant. It had always been pleasant. Jasper had come to distrust the pleasantness the way you come to distrust the quiet before certain kinds of storms. Heading east in this weather. Jasper did not stop thunder moving through. "The mail-order bride did not arrive, I hear." Drummond let the words settle into the cold air. "Let them find their weight. That is a shame. Terrible weather for travel. Terrible weather for a lot of things." He let a moment pass. "You know, I was speaking with some men from the county land office recently. Interesting conversation. Your eastern pasture came up." Jasper stopped thunder then, not because he wanted to, but because some things require you to look at them directly before you ride past. He turned in the saddle. Drummond was watching him with the mild, interested expression of a man reviewing a contract he intends to sign at a time of his own choosing. "My eastern pasture has been mine for 10 years, Jasper said. "Of course," Drummond nodded agreeably. "Of course it has. I just thought you should know that these conversations happen, especially when a man is away from his property for an extended period." He paused. The pause was measured. Everything about Drummond was measured. "You be safe out there, Calloway. The mountains do not forgive carelessness." Jasper held the man's gaze for 2 full seconds, long enough to register what was being said and what was being meant, and the distance between those two things. Then he turned thunder east and rode without another word. He carried the weight of that exchange with him through the first morning of riding, turning it over in the back of his mind while the front focused on the trail. The snow reached Thunder's knees in the low spots, and the wind came out of the north with no regard for what it found in its path. By mid-morning, the sky had darkened again, and fine dry snow began to sift down from it. The kind that does not accumulate fast but gets into everything. The collar of your coat, the folds of your blanket, the creases of your face. But he pressed on. East. His eyes sweeping the white expanse on either side of the trail with a methodical patience that he had learned from years of looking for cattle in bad weather and was now applying to something that mattered considerably more. He knew this country well. He had ridden this trail in every season and in every kind of weather the Rocky Mountain winter could manufacture. He knew where the trail tended to drift and where it stayed relatively passable. He knew the landmarks. The notched pine at the base of the first long grade, the frozen creek crossing at mile 8, the rocky outcropping that looked like a sleeping bear if the light hit it right. He marked each one as he passed and moved on, pushing east. And with each landmark that fell behind him, the distance between himself and Lenora Pemberton grew smaller in his mind, even as the snow grew deeper beneath Thunder's legs. That night he made camp in a shallow cave in the rock face of a hillside, out of the wind, with a fire built from dry branches that burned clean and hot. Thunder stood nearby, close enough to benefit from the warmth, his breath pluming steadily in the dark. Jasper sat with his back against the stone and drank a single cup of coffee from his trail pack and held the silver bracelet in his open palm and looked at it in the firelight. It was such a small thing, such a small circle of metal to carry such weight. But children understand weight differently than adults do. They know that the size of a thing and the importance of a thing are entirely separate measurements. He closed his hand around it and put it in his coat pocket where it would be warm. Behind him, in the cold street of a small Colorado town, a 10-year-old boy stood watching the place where his father had disappeared into the white. His left hand was in his coat pocket. His right hand hung at his side. His face was set in the expression of someone who has placed a bet on something he believes in completely and is now waiting to learn whether the world agrees. Emmett Calloway stood there for a long time. Then he turned and walked back to Hazel Pruitt's boarding house, where a warm room and a mathematics textbook and the particular patience of a boy who has decided to believe we're waiting for him. The snow kept falling. The mountains did not care. And somewhere between the town and the storm, a man on a horse rode east with a letter against his heart and a bracelet in his fist, and the sound of his son's voice still in his ears. Bring her back. He intended to. He did not sleep well that night in the cave, not because of the cold, which was manageable, not because of the discomfort, which he had learned long ago to ignore. He did not sleep because every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lenora Pemberton as he had constructed her from 6 months of letters, capable, plain-spoken, plain, unafraid. Walking east through the snow with a small compass in her hand and the absolute conviction that someone on the other end of the trail was worth the effort of getting there. He hoped he was worth the effort. He was back in the saddle before first light, and the second day was harder than the first. The wind had shifted during the night, coming now from the northwest with a sharpness that found every gap in his clothing and settled there like a guest who had no intention of leaving. Thunder moved steadily but slowly, picking his path through drifts that reached the horse's chest in the narrow draws between ridgelines. The sky was the color of iron and offered nothing in the way of encouragement. Jasper called her name as he rode. The sound of his voice went out into the white silence and came back to him changed by the cold, flattened and small. The kind of sound that makes a man understand exactly how large the world is and how small a single person is within it. He called it again and again, and the snow absorbed each call the way it absorbed everything else, quietly and completely and without acknowledgement. By late afternoon of the second day, he found the stagecoach. It was tilted at an angle on a frozen slope perhaps 15 miles east of Salida, one rear wheel shattered, the body half buried in snow that had drifted against the downhill side. The horses were gone. The driver's bench was empty. The door hung open on one hinge like a jaw that had been broken and never set properly. He dismounted and checked the interior. Personal effects scattered on the tilted floor. A Bible with a cracked spine. A merchant's sample case burst open. A woman's shawl, dark wool, caught on a nail near the window frame. But no people, no bodies. No blood beyond a small dark stain on the window glass where someone's head had met the frame with some force. They had survived the wreck. They had gone somewhere. He found their trail within 20 minutes. Footprints, partially filled by subsequent snowfall, but still readable to a man who knew how to read such things. 5 sets of prints leading north from the coach into a stand of timber. He followed them on foot, leading Thunder by the reins, until the timber opened onto a small clearing, and a trapper's cabin appeared in the gray light like something that had been placed there by someone who understood that people would eventually need it. 4 people were inside. The driver had gone for help the first day and had not returned, which could mean many things, most of them bad. An older man named Orrin, quiet and self-contained, who had been reading the same Bible from the coach, and who looked up at Jasper with the calm of someone who had been expecting rescue and was not particularly surprised by its form. A man called Peyton, middle-aged, a merchant by the look of his clothes, whose right arm was bound in a makeshift splint fashioned from a straight stick and strips of white fabric that Jasper recognized immediately as the kind of fabric women wore beneath their dresses. 2 women traveling together, one of whom had a bandage on her forehead made from the same careful hand that had set the merchant's arm. 4 people, not 5. Jasper stood in the doorway of the cabin and looked at each face and felt something drop inside his chest, the way a stone drops through water. Straight down, without resistance. Where is the fifth passenger? The older man, Orrin, set down his Bible. She left yesterday morning, before dawn, took her share of the provisions and her compass and went west on foot. The two women exchanged a glance that contained several things Jasper did not have time to interpret. Peyton shifted his broken arm and winced. She set my arm, Peyton said, tore up her own underskirts for the bandages, organized the food, divided the blankets so everyone had equal share. He looked at Jasper with the slightly dazed expression of a man who has been in an emergency and is still sorting out what happened. Then she just left. Jasper left them his provisions, all of them. He told Orrin how to find the trail back to the main road and promised to send help from Salida. Then he turned Thunder west and rode into the diminishing light with a kind of focus that had no room for doubt or second-guessing. She had left the cabin sometime yesterday morning. She had perhaps 20 hours on him in conditions that would have tired a fit man in half the time. She was on foot. She had a compass. She had the stubbornness that her letters had described and that 4 strangers in a cabin had just confirmed. And she had a reason for leaving that he did not yet understand. What Lenora Pemberton had actually been doing while Jasper Calloway read her letters in the cold and built his plan to find her was a thing she would only tell him later, in pieces. On the nights when the fire was burning low and Emmett was asleep, and the ranch house had that particular quiet that invites honesty. She had left Boston on the 12th of December as planned. The train south had been slow but reliable, and she had arrived in Pueblo on the 14th with a single trunk and the canvas bag she kept with her on the seat. The stagecoach to Salida had been scheduled for the morning of the 15th, and she had been on it when it left Pueblo. Sitting in the rear-facing seat in her gray-blue pioneer dress with her bag on her lap and her hands folded over it in the composed manner of a woman who has made a long journey and knows how to make herself small for the duration. There had been 5 passengers: Orrin, who read his Bible and asked no questions; Peyton, the merchant, who talked too much about his business; 2 women traveling together to visit family east of Salida; and a 5th passenger who had boarded at the last moment in Pueblo, taking the corner seat across from Lenora without speaking, without offering a name. Lenora had noticed him the way she noticed most things, quietly, without making it apparent that she was noticing. He was perhaps 30, well-built, with the look of someone who worked outdoors for a living. His hands were calloused. His coat was good quality, but worn in the particular way that work clothes get worn, not from age but from use. On the left cuff of his coat, just above the wrist, she caught a glimpse of an embroidered letter, small dark thread on dark fabric. She could not be certain in the dim interior of the coach, but it looked like the letter D. She filed this away without attaching meaning to it. There was no reason to attach meaning to it. Not then. The storm hit on the 2nd day. It came in from the northwest with the speed and seriousness of the mountains at their most uncompromising. The driver fought it for 3 hours before the stagecoach lost the trail entirely in a whiteout and the lead horse slipped on a sheet of ice beneath the snow. The coach went off the trail at an angle and dropped hard onto a frozen slope. One rear wheel shattered on impact. Nobody was killed. Peyton broke his arm. One of the women, Mrs. Farley, cut her forehead on the window frame. Lenora had braced herself in the last second before impact and came through without injury. She was the first one out of the tilted door, standing knee-deep in snow, assessing the damage with the matter-of-fact attention of someone whose father had taught her that panic is a luxury and practicality is a skill. Orrin had found the trapper's cabin less than a quarter mile through the timber, and they had gotten everyone there through the snow. Lenora had set Peyton's arm with a straight stick and strips torn from her petticoat, her hands steady and her instructions calm. She had organized the food. She had divided the blankets equitably. She had done the things that needed doing without waiting to be asked. But she had watched the man from the corner seat the entire time. He had helped move Peyton to the cabin. That was fine. He had eaten his share of the provisions without complaint. That was fine. But on the first night, when Lenora was nearly asleep and the others were breathing in the deep rhythm of exhaustion, she had heard the man speaking low near the door to Mrs. Farley. She had not caught all of it, but she had caught enough. "Which one is the Calloway woman?" Mrs. Farley had answered with a gesture rather than words, apparently pointing, and the man had looked across the dim space of the cabin to where Lenora lay still with her eyes half closed. She stayed still for a long time after that, thinking. By morning she had made her decision, not in fear, though fear was present, in calculation. The clear, unsentimental arithmetic her father had taught her. She was the least injured. The driver had estimated less than 20 miles to Salida. She had a compass, her share of provisions, and 2 good legs. And somewhere to the west was a man who had written her 11 letters over 6 months and had told her in his plain and unadorned way the exact truth about himself and his life and what he was hoping to find in it. She believed those letters. She believed them the way you believe something that does not try to convince you. Jasper Calloway was going to be worried. She knew this the way she knew the other things she knew about him, with a quiet certainty that did not require proof. She slipped out of the cabin in the gray pre-dawn, compass in hand, and turned her face west. The first 3 hours were manageable. The snow was deep, but not treacherous on the open flats, and she could follow the general line of the stage trail by the way the landscape flattened on either side of where the road once ran. The compass kept her honest when the trail disappeared. She walked steadily and did not let herself think past the next half mile. This was a technique she had developed during the worst months after her parents died, when surviving the day had required not thinking about the week. Then the wind shifted. It came around from the north and then the northwest, pushing snow horizontally across her path, filling her tracks behind her within minutes. The temperature dropped. The compass was still true, but the landmarks she had been using to triangulate her position disappeared behind shifting walls of white. After 4 hours, she was no longer certain she was going west. After 5 hours, her feet had gone from cold to numb to something beyond numb that she did not have a word for. She found a downed pine sometime in the early afternoon. Its trunk and branches created a partial shelter from the wind on the lee side, and she pressed herself against it and ate the last of her provisions and rested there for what might have been an hour or might have been 3. The shelter was not warmth, but it was the absence of the worst of the wind. And in conditions like these, the absence of the worst is its own kind of gift. But she could not stay. Staying was sitting, and sitting was giving up. She pushed herself upright and walked on. She would not sit down. Sitting down in cold like this was giving up, and she did not give up. She had made that promise in a letter, and she had made it to herself before she ever wrote it to anyone. But her body had its own arithmetic, separate from her will, and it had been doing calculations she was not consulted about. When her legs finally gave way, it was not dramatic. She was simply walking, and then she was not walking. The way a flame that has run out of fuel does not flicker or die theatrically, but simply stops being. She went down on her side in the snow, and the snow was cold for only a moment, and then it was not cold anymore. which she understood was the most dangerous sign of all, and which she could not make herself care about because the tiredness had gotten into her bones and was very heavy. She thought about the letters. She thought about the line she had written in the last one. I will be there. She thought about how she did not quit. And then she thought, he is coming. She believed this with a completeness that had no logic in it and required none. He is coming, and I just have to stay here and be findable. She did not close her eyes. Jasper Calloway saw it just before the last of the light left the sky. He had been riding west for most of the afternoon, moving back toward Salida from the cabin, scanning the snow on both sides of the trail with the focus of a man who understands that what he is looking for will not announce itself. The gray of her pioneer dress was very close to the gray of the snow in the failing light. She was on her side with her back partly to him, and the snow had dusted the upper part of her coat and her hair with a fine white layer that made her edges uncertain. He would not have seen her at all if Thunder had not turned his head slightly to the right when they passed within 20 feet of her. The instinct of an animal that knows when something alive is present. He was off the horse before it stopped moving. He was on his knees in the snow beside her in the next heartbeat, turning her gently onto her back, and his heart was doing the thing again that he had never had a word for. The combination of terror and purpose that made everything else very far away. She was breathing, shallow, slow, but breathing. Lenora. Her eyelids moved, they opened. The blue eyes found his face and focused there. Her lips moved, the shape of breath that was barely a sound. I knew you would come. He had always believed himself to be a man of few emotions. Not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. The channeling of it into useful action rather than expression. He found, kneeling in the snow in the last light of a January day, with this woman's eyes looking up at him, that he had been wrong about this. I am here, he said, right here. I have you. He wrapped her in both blankets from his pack without waiting to do it gracefully. He lifted her with the care he used for nothing else. The way you lift something you have almost lost before you fully understood its value. He settled her across Thunder's back before him and gathered her in against his chest and felt through all the layers of winter clothing, the alarming cold of her body, even against his own warmth. The line shack was less than a mile further west. He had known it was there, filed away in the back of his mind from an August cattle drive 3 years ago. A small shelter used by drovers during the summer grazing season. It would be cold inside, but it would be out of the wind, and there would be wood in the stack beside the door if no one had burned it since. He found it in the dark by memory and landmarks, and the particular instinct that develops in a man who has spent years learning a piece of country the way you learn a language, not by studying it, but by living inside it. He got a fire going in the small cast iron stove with hands that moved faster than he was thinking, packing kindling, striking the match, feeding the first small flames with careful precision. He spread her damp outer clothes near the heat. He made coffee from his trail pack and poured it into the tin cup he carried and put it into her hands, closing her fingers around it when they would not close on their own. He watched her color come back by degrees. A slow tide of warmth moving from the center outward while the fire grew and the shack lost its worst cold. Her hands around the cup steadied from a shake to a tremble, to a stillness that was almost normal. Several of her fingers were white and waxy in a way he recognized and that would need a doctor's attention as soon as they reached town. But she was talking. She was tracking his face. She was Lenora Pemberton, and she was alive. He sat down on the rough wooden bunk across from her, elbows on his knees, and looked at her in the firelight for a moment without speaking. She looked back. It was the first time they had looked directly at each other. The first time the 6 months of paper and ink had a face on it. And the strangeness of this was present in the air between them, along with the wood smoke and the steam from the coffee. "You walked away from the cabin," he said. "In that weather." "I did. No apology in it. No defense. Just the fact." "Why?" She looked at the fire for a moment before she answered, and what she said was not what he expected. There was a man on the coach. He never gave his name. On the first night in the cabin, I heard him ask which one of us was the Calloway woman. She looked back at Jasper. On his coat there was an embroidered letter. I could not be certain, but I believe it was a D. Jasper went very still. The fire popped once in the silence. "D," he repeated. I could be wrong about the letter. I was half asleep, and the light was bad. He was not looking at her now. He was looking at a point somewhere past the far wall of the shack, and the expression on his face had changed in a way that she could read clearly even at first acquaintance. It was the expression of a man putting two things together that he had been keeping in separate places. Drummond. The pleasant voice at the edge of town that morning. The conversation about the eastern pasture. The comment about men being away from their property for extended periods. And Lenora's stagecoach delayed 3 weeks by a wheel that should not have broken the way it broke. He brought himself back to the present with a deliberate effort. This was not the time for it. This was not the place. Right now, there was only one thing that mattered in this small, warm space, and it was sitting across from him with cold, reddened cheeks and blue eyes that held an intelligence he had underestimated even from her letters, which had set a high bar to begin with. "You left because your instinct told you to," he said. "My instinct and my arithmetic both. Were you afraid?" She considered the question seriously, which was one of the things he was already beginning to understand was characteristic of her. She did not give easy answers to real questions. "Yes, but not of the weather." She paused. "I was more afraid of meeting you than of the storm." He looked at her. "Of meeting me. A storm can only kill you." Lenora Pemberton said this with the calm of someone who has worked the mathematics through and is now reporting the conclusion. "You could make me regret coming." The fire settled in the stove. Outside, the wind pressed at the walls and found no way in. Jasper Calloway was 34 years old and had not said anything about himself to another person that genuinely mattered in 5 years. He was not a man who found this kind of honesty comfortable. But there was something about the woman sitting across from him, the directness of her, the absence of performance. It made lying or deflection feel not just wrong, but beside the point. "I was afraid too," he said. "I have been afraid since the 15th of December, not of the weather either." He looked at his hands for a moment. "Afraid you would get here and see the place and see me and start calculating whether you had made a mistake." Lenora looked at him for a long time in the firelight. "Your letters had nothing in them that was false," she said at last. "I know what I was answering when I wrote back." Something shifted in the room then. Not dramatically, just a small and definitive settling. The way a foundation settles when it is properly laid, when the weight it was built for is finally placed upon it and everything finds its level. They talked for a long time after that, feeding the fire as it needed feeding, the coffee cups refilled and gone cold and left. They talked about the things that letters leave out, the texture of his days, the sound the ranch makes at 4 in the morning when only the horses are awake, the way Emmett sometimes sat for an hour with a piece of wood and a knife and came out the other side with a small animal that looked exactly the way an animal should look. She told him about the particular smell of old paper in the Boylston Street Library, about the woman who ran the reading room who had once told Lenora that books were the only men worth trusting, and how Lenora had laughed but also written the sentence down. She told him about her mother's garden, which she still dreamed about sometimes, the roses that her mother could grow in soil that should not have supported them, the stubbornness of it, where the stubbornness had come from, perhaps. He told her about Ruth. Not everything and not all at once, but enough. The way she had laughed, the way she had faced the hard years of early ranching without complaint, the fever that had come on fast and that he had not understood fast enough, and the particular weight of that, the weight that does not lighten with time, but that you learn to carry in a different way. Lenora listened without trying to remedy any of it. She did not say it was not his fault. She did not say these things happen. She just listened, which was more useful than either of those things. At some point, the wind outside gentled to something manageable. The fire burned down to coals, and Jasper fed it again. The bracelet was in his coat pocket, and he was aware of it there. The way you are aware of things you are holding in trust for someone. Tomorrow they would ride back to Salida. There would be Hazel and Virgil and Dr. Abernathy and all the arrangements that come after a rescue. There would be Emmett, who had sent his father out with his mother's bracelet and his absolute 10-year-old certainty, and who deserved to know that the certainty had been warranted. There would also, Jasper thought, as the firelight played across Lenora Pemberton's face while she slept on the bunk across from him, be Silas Drummond, the man with the eastern pasture and the pleasant voice and the letter D embroidered on someone's coat cuff. That was a matter that would need attending to, in its time, in its proper way. But that was tomorrow. Tonight there was only the fire and the wind and the two of them, and the particular silence of a place where something important has just been decided without needing to be said aloud. Jasper sat with his back against the wall and his boots near the heat and the letter in his breast pocket and the bracelet in his coat, and watched the door and did not sleep, because some things are worth staying awake for. They came into Salida the following afternoon under a sky gone the color of pewter, with the sun somewhere behind the cloud cover doing its best and not managing much. Jasper had Lenora in front of him on Thunder, her back against his chest, the blanket pulled around her shoulders against the cold that the morning's riding had not fully defeated. He had his left arm around her and his right hand on the reins, and he held both with the same careful steadiness, the same attention to what was fragile and what was not. Virgil Polk was the first to reach them. He came out of his store at a half run with his coat unbuttoned and his face doing several things at once. Relief and relief and relief, stacked on top of each other like stones in a cairn. He grabbed Thunder's bridle and looked up at Jasper and then at Lenora with the undisguised emotion of a man who has been imagining bad outcomes for 2 days and is now discovering they were wrong. I had 3 different plans for telling Emmett, Virgil said. None of them were any good. None of them will be needed, Jasper said. Hazel Pruitt came out of the boarding house at a walk that was almost a run, but had been converted to a walk by pure willpower, because Hazel Pruitt did not run in public unless there was fire. She looked at Lenora the way a doctor looks at a patient before saying anything, quickly and comprehensively. Then she looked at Jasper with an expression that conveyed approximately 8 sentences in the time it would have taken to say 2. Then Emmett came around the corner of the boarding house at a full run. He stopped about 10 feet from the horse, the sudden halt of a boy who has been moving on instinct and has run straight into self-consciousness. He stood in the cold street with his hands at his sides, and he looked up at the woman on his father's horse with those serious brown eyes that saw more than they let on. Lenora Pemberton looked back at him. She had been told about Emmett in letters. She had been told about the quietness and the wood carving and the mathematics textbook that served as camouflage. She had been told about the bracelet, but the letters had not prepared her for the specific quality of Emmett Calloway's attention. The focused, patient, gathering nature of it. The look of someone building a case. Jasper helped her down from the saddle. She was unsteady on her feet, but would not take his arm in the first moment, and he had already understood enough about her to let her have that. He reached into his coat pocket and held out his closed hand to Emmett. The boy opened his palm, and Jasper set the bracelet into it. Emmett looked at it for a moment. Then he closed his fingers around it and put it back in his left coat pocket without a word. Lenora steadied herself. Then she did the thing that Jasper would remember afterward as the first of many moments when he understood he had not overestimated her. She crouched down, not quickly and not with any ceremony, just brought herself to his level, which cost her something with the cold in her joints, which she paid without showing it on her face. They were eye to eye in the gray afternoon light. "You are Emmett," she said. "Yes, ma'am. Your father has told me a great deal about you." Emmett received this with the careful neutrality of a boy who is not yet sure what to do with it. "He told me things about you too," he said. A pause. "He read me some of your letters." "Did he?" She did not make it a question. "The ones about Boston." Another pause, more deliberate. "And the one where you said you do not quit." Something moved in Lenora's expression, subtle enough that only someone paying close attention would have caught it. "That is a true statement," she said. "I want you to know that." Emmett looked at her for a long moment with his full collecting attention, the attention that gathered and weighed and sorted and filed. Then he said, in the way of a boy who has completed an initial assessment and is now offering his preliminary findings, "You are wearing a pioneer dress." "I am. It is wet." "It is," she agreed. "You should go inside." And that, for the time being, was that. Dr. Samuel Abernathy examined Lenora in his small office on the east side of Main Street, working with the economical movements of a man who has performed this kind of assessment many times and who does not waste motion or words. Jasper sat in the waiting area outside and listened to the low murmur of instructions and responses through the closed door, the steady back and forth of a medical consultation conducted by two people who shared a preference for directness. The verdict came before the door opened. 2 weeks, Dr. Abernathy said. No unnecessary cold exposure. The fingers and toes need careful attention. There is some surface frostbite that will resolve with proper care, but should not be tested. He looked at Jasper. She can stay here. She will stay with me. Hazel Pruitt said this from behind Jasper in a tone that made it clear the decision had already been made. She had arrived at the doctor's office without being summoned, in the way Hazel arrived at most situations that required organizing, which was to say, completely and without apology. The girl stays in my spare room. It is warm, and I will see to her properly. She turned to include Jasper in her peripheral vision. You will visit at appropriate hours. Jasper did not argue. He looked through the doorway at Lenora, who was sitting on the examination table rewrapping her own hand with the gauze Dr. Abernathy had indicated, doing it neatly and without fuss. She caught his eye through the doorway. There was a moment of communication in that look that did not require any of the words surrounding it. An acknowledgement that something had passed between them in that small shack in the dark and the cold. Something that did not require formalization to be real, but that would benefit from being formalized when the time came. And an agreement reached without discussion that they would let things settle in their proper order. He came to Hazel's boarding house the next morning and the morning after that, sometimes alone. Sometimes with Emmett, who had by some private arithmetic decided that the situation warranted monitoring. Emmett would sit in the corner of Hazel's front parlor with a book or a piece of wood he was working on and watch the two adults talk with the alert patience of a boy gathering additional evidence for a verdict he had not yet fully rendered. The conversations built on each other the way conversations do when two people have already covered the formal ground and are now discovering the actual territory. Jasper told her about the ranch in the particular detail he had never put in letters, not because he had been withholding, but because some things require presence to describe. The way the light came across the eastern pasture in late October. The quality of the water from the creek that ran along the property's northern edge, the exact arrangement of the barn and the two outbuildings and the house with its 3 bedrooms and its good stone fireplace and its wide front porch that he had never put furniture on because it had always seemed like the kind of thing you waited to do until you had someone to do it with. Lenora told him about her father's particular way of working. Not the general facts she had put in her letters, but the specifics that come with telling someone in person. How he would spread 6 documents across the dining table and stand over them with his coffee cooling beside him, looking for the thread that connected what one paper said to what another paper assumed. How he would say to her when she was young enough to sit on his knee and watch, "Every lie leaves a seam, Lenora. You just have to know where to look for the stitching." She told him about learning to sew in the months after her parents died, how the needle and thread had become a way to earn money and also a way to stay sane. The rhythm of it, the satisfaction of taking something damaged and making it whole again. She told him about the decision to answer his advertisement, how the line about looking for a partner, not a servant, had been the thing that made her pick up the pen. On the 5th day of her recovery, Emmett found her on the boarding house porch in the afternoon sun. She was wrapped in 2 blankets and doing mending on a piece of Hazel's household linen because she was incapable of sitting still without useful work in her hands. Emmett came and stood a few feet away, not approaching all the way, in the manner of someone who has a thing to do and is working up to the doing of it. Lenora did not rush him. She kept her hands moving on the linen and let him find his own way in. After perhaps 2 minutes, he took the silver bracelet from his left coat pocket and held it in his open palm, looking down at it rather than at her. "She gave it to me before she died," he said. "My father was not there when she got sick. He was away. And by the time he came back, it had gone too far." He said this with the careful neutrality of a child who has worked very hard to understand something and to hold it without blame. He blames himself. He has always blamed himself. Lenora set the mending down on her knees. She looked at the bracelet and then at the boy holding it. "Your father told me about her," she said. "He told me she was kind." She was. Emmett closed his fingers around the bracelet, then opened them again. I have been thinking about something. About why you came. He looked up at her for the first time since he had started talking. I think maybe she sent you so that he would stop blaming himself. Because he went looking this time, and he found you in time. He said this in the particular tone of a 10-year-old who has worked out a theological point and is not entirely certain of it, but is committed to presenting it. I cannot prove that, but I think it. Lenora Pemberton sat with this for a long moment. She was a practical woman. She was honest about what she knew and what she did not know. And she did not know whether dead mothers sent help to the living or whether the world was organized in ways that permitted such arrangements. But she knew what the boy in front of her needed. And she knew that the truest thing she could offer him was not reassurance, but presence. She moved on the porch bench and left a space beside her. Emmett looked at the space. Then he sat down in it. They sat together in the thin January sun for a long time without speaking, close enough that he could feel the warmth of the blankets, close enough that she could see out of the corner of her eye the way he held the bracelet in his lap, with a grip that had changed from something clenched to something open. That evening, Jasper came to the porch and found Emmett still there, talking to Lenora about a book he had been reading about the early mountain men of the Rockies, gesturing with both hands to indicate the scale of certain animals and geographical features. Lenora was listening with the full attention she gave to things that interested her, asking questions that indicated she had been tracking every word. Jasper stood in the doorway without interrupting. He watched his son talk with both hands the way Emmett had talked as a very small boy, before he had learned the habit of quietness. Before the habit of quietness became his natural condition. And he understood, in the way you understand the important things, not as a thought, but as a fact your body registers before your mind catches up, that something had been given back in this exchange that he had not known how to give himself. The wedding took place 2 weeks after Lenora's arrival, on a Saturday morning in the first week of February, in the small white church at the north end of Main Street. Reverend Braddock performed the ceremony with the measured warmth of a man who had married many couples in this territory and who understood that the weight of what was happening did not require embellishment. The women of Salida had made the dress. They had begun it within 2 days of Lenora's arrival, before anyone had asked them to, because in a small town a story moves faster than a person can tell it. And the story of Jasper Calloway riding 3 days into a blizzard to find his mail-order bride had produced in the community a spontaneous act of collective goodwill that manifested itself in cream-colored satin and careful needlework. Lenora had received the dress from Hazel on the morning of the wedding and had stood holding it for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read. Not because she was hiding anything, but because she was feeling something she did not have a practiced response for. She had been managing alone for 3 years. Being received was a different thing from managing alone. Emmett stood at his father's left shoulder in his best coat with the ring in his right hand, held with the focused care of someone who has been given a single important task and is giving it everything. Virgil Polk occupied the front pew with the expression of a man who has decided he is going to cry and is at peace with this decision. Hazel sat beside him with excellent posture and bright eyes, and the look of someone who had arranged many things and was satisfied with the results. When Reverend Braddock asked Lenora if she took Jasper Calloway as her husband, she turned and looked directly at Jasper and said yes in a voice that was neither loud nor soft, but carried clearly through the small church. The voice of a woman who means what she says and knows that she means it. Jasper said his yes in the same key. That evening, when Emmett was asleep in his room and the ranch house had settled into its night sounds around them, Lenora and Jasper sat by the fire, and she asked him the question that had been sitting quiet in her since the ceremony. Tell me honestly, are you marrying me because you want to, or because you feel that you ought to after riding out to find me? He looked at the fire for a moment. Then he looked at her. When I placed that advertisement, he said, I placed it because Hazel told me Emmett needed a mother, and she was right. That was the honest reason, and I am not going to tell you otherwise. He paused. But by the third letter you sent me, I was reading your mail before Emmett's. By the fifth letter, I was reading them twice. And by the time the 15th of December came and went with no coach, what I felt was not concern for Emmett's welfare. He held her gaze. I can tell you the difference between those two things, because I know what both of them feel like. Lenora was quiet for a moment. That answer is honest enough to trust. I try to be. I know. I could tell from the letters. She looked at the fire. I am going to tell you something that I should say out loud. I have managed alone long enough that I may not always know how to let someone else carry half the weight. I will not pretend otherwise when I do not know how. She glanced at him. But I will always tell you which it is. That is not a warning. It is information. I know the difference, Jasper said. I thought you might. They sat with the fire until it burned down to deep coals, not needing to fill the quiet, which was itself a kind of information about the two of them. Later that week, on a night when the fire was burning low and Emmett was asleep upstairs, Jasper told her about Ruth. Not the version he had told her in the line shack, which had been the version a man tells when he is introducing a wound. This was the version underneath, the one he had never told anyone. She laughed at things before I understood they were funny, he said. He was looking at the fire rather than at Lenora, which was how he looked when he was saying things that cost him. She saw the world at a different angle than I did. She made the early years bearable. The years when the house was just a frame and the cattle kept getting through the fence, and I was not sure any of it was going to work. He stopped. The fire shifted. When she started coughing, I thought it was the dust. We had been working the herd all week, and the air was thick with it. I told her to rest. She said she was fine. I chose to believe her because I needed to be out with the cattle, and believing her was easier than staying. His voice changed then. Not louder, not softer. But the quality of it shifted the way the quality of light shifts just before weather changes. Something underneath the steadiness that the steadiness had been built to contain. I chose to go gather cattle instead of staying home when she started to cough. I told myself there was time. I always told myself there was time. He stopped again. Longer this time. By the time I came back 3 days later, the fever had taken hold and there was nothing Dr. Abernathy could do that would have made a difference. She died in our bed on a Tuesday evening in October with Emmett sitting on the floor beside her holding that bracelet and me standing in the doorway, understanding for the first time in my life what it feels like to arrive too late for the only thing that matters. His shoulders moved. Not dramatically, a tremor that passed through him the way a tremor passes through the ground before something gives way. His breath caught again. And then something that had been held for 5 years in the particular way that men hold things they cannot put down found its way out. Not as a single tear, not as a dignified expression of controlled grief, as the real thing, the shoulders shaking, the breath coming in pieces, the sound of a man who has been carrying a weight in silence for so long that the act of setting it down does not feel like relief. It feels like breaking. Lenora did not move toward him. She did not say it was not his fault. She did not say these things happen. She did not say any of the things that people say when they are trying to make someone else's pain more manageable for themselves to witness. She sat where she was, and she let the silence do the work that silence does, when it is not empty, but full. Full of presence, full of the particular quality of attention that says, I am here and I am not going anywhere, and you do not have to explain or justify or contain this for my benefit. After a while, the shaking slowed, the breathing steadied. Jasper sat with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he was quiet for a long time. When he finally looked up, the fire had burned very low, and Lenora was in exactly the same place she had been, watching him with the same steady attention. No pity in it, no discomfort, just the full weight of her presence offered without condition. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, the gesture of a man returning to himself from a place he had not planned to visit. I have not told anyone that, he said, the part about choosing to leave. I know, Lenora said. I could tell. The fire settled. The house was quiet around them. Somewhere upstairs, Emmett turned in his sleep, and the bed frame creaked once. The sound of a boy dreaming in a house that was learning how to hold more than it had been holding. The trouble with Silas Drummond announced itself 10 days after the wedding. It came through Jasper's cattle hand, a quiet and reliable man who had the particular manner of someone carrying difficult news he has been sitting on longer than is comfortable. He appeared at the barn door while Jasper was doing the morning feeding and said he needed a word. The word was Drummond. While Jasper had been riding east, while the wedding had occupied the town's attention, Drummond had filed a legal claim at the Chaffee County Land Office. The claim covered 300 acres of Jasper's eastern pasture, the open grazing land along the creek bottom that represented roughly 1/3 of the ranch's workable acreage. The basis of the claim was a handwritten document dated 1879, bearing the signature of a county land officer named Simmons, who had retired to Santa Fe the previous year. Jasper read the copy at the kitchen table with the still face of a man absorbing information he has not fully processed. Then he read it again. 300 acres, 1/3 of his operation. Without that pasture, the summer grazing capacity dropped by half, and the herd would need to be culled accordingly. The ranch would not fail immediately, but the financial slope it would put him on would steepen every year thereafter. And Drummond, who did not appear to be short of patience, would simply wait at the bottom of it. He went to Sheriff Holt that afternoon. Holt was a careful man and a fair one. He read both documents with the unhurried attention of someone who has been settling land disputes in this territory long enough to know where the relevant details tend to hide. Your deed is older, and it is clean, Holt said. That gives you a strong position. He set the papers down. But Drummond filed through the county office, and it has been entered into the official record. The presiding judge on this circuit right now is Judge Whitmore, who came up from Denver 6 months ago and does not know this county or its history. Holt looked at Jasper with the directness of a man who respects the person he is giving bad news to. You need a lawyer, Jasper. The nearest one worth having is in Pueblo. 3 days' ride in good conditions, more in this weather. And the filing has a response deadline. 14 days from the date of filing. He picked up his coffee cup and set it down again without drinking. I am going to be honest with you. Drummond chose his timing. Jasper rode home in the cold afternoon and told Lenora what Holt had said, with the same plain economy he used for most things that required courage to say. She listened without interrupting, And when he had finished, she was quiet for a moment, with the focused stillness she had when she was thinking rather than when she was waiting. Then she said, "Show me both documents." Jasper spread them on the kitchen table. Lenora sat down and read Drummond's claim with her full attention, moving through it slowly, then going back and reading certain sections again. She had the habit of her father's profession without having the profession itself. The habit of looking at a document not for what it said first, but for what it assumed, for the framework behind the words that the words were resting on. She found it on the second reading. "Look at this." She pointed to the header block of Drummond's 1879 document. "This form. The numbered sections here. The way the land description fields are laid out. My father worked with these forms." She looked up at Jasper. "This format was not adopted by Chaffee County until 1881. I am nearly certain of it. The county updated their standard land filing forms in that year. Before that, they used an older format inherited from the territorial period." Jasper looked at the document and then at her. "You are sure?" "I am sure enough to check. The land office keeps its own records of procedural changes. If I can obtain the reference documents for 1879 versus 1881, the comparison will be clear." She looked at the filing again. "Drummond is careful, but he used a form that did not exist yet on the date he claims this document was signed. Either he filed it recently and backdated it, or it was prepared by someone who did not notice the discrepancy. How do you get access to those reference documents without alerting Drummond's people?" Lenora thought about this. "I tell the clerk I am doing research for a piece about the history of land settlement in the county for a church publication. Women doing historical research do not attract particular suspicion. Men going through legal records do." She spent 3 days in the county records office, working steadily through the reference materials with the patience of someone who has been trained to find things in organized collections of paper. She returned each evening with notes in her precise handwriting, building the case piece by piece, the way her father had built cases, not with argument, but with documented fact. On the third day, she came home at mid-afternoon with her coat still on and sat down at the kitchen table and spread her notes in front of Jasper without a word of preamble. 3 discrepancies. The form header, which was not in use in 1879. The notarization format, which changed in early 1880. And a land parcel reference number in the body of the document that corresponds to a county filing system not implemented until 1882. She looked up at him. Any one of these could be explained away. All 3 together cannot be. This document was not signed in 1879. It was prepared sometime after 1882, and the date was filled in afterward. They went before Judge Whitmore on a Thursday morning with Sheriff Holt standing to Jasper's left and Virgil Polk in the gallery behind them and Drummond across the room with his lawyer from Denver, a man in a 3-piece suit who had the practiced ease of someone accustomed to winning in unfamiliar courtrooms. Lenora sat beside Jasper and said nothing while the Denver lawyer presented the 1879 claim with confident fluency, citing precedent and county law and the legal weight of registered documents, building his argument the way an architect builds a structure he intends to stand in. Then Lenora placed on the table in front of Judge Whitmore a single handwritten page. She explained what it contained in language that was clear and sequential and required no legal training to follow. She explained the form header, the notarization format, the parcel reference number, and she explained the timeline that made all 3 of them impossible if the document was what it claimed to be. The room was quiet after she finished. Judge Whitmore looked at the page. He looked at the original documents. He looked at Drummond's lawyer, whose expression had slipped considerably from its earlier confidence. "Mr. Drummond," Whitmore said, "this appears to be a substantial problem with your filing." Drummond sat very still in his chair. His face had not moved. He was a man who had built a considerable life on the discipline of not showing what he was thinking, and the discipline held now. At least on the surface, the claim was dismissed. Outside the courthouse on the wooden steps in the February cold, Drummond came out a minute later buttoning his coat, his lawyer behind him. He stopped when he reached Jasper and Lenora, not because he had to, because he chose to. Because he was the kind of man who made every encounter a choice between the options available to him. He did not look at Jasper. He looked at Lenora, with the measuring attention he had previously reserved for property assessments. The Calloway woman. He said it not unkindly, informatively, as though cataloging a new entry in an inventory he maintained. Lenora met his gaze without any change in her expression. Drummond held the look for 2 seconds. Then he nodded once. The fractional nod of a man acknowledging a shift in the balance of a contest, and walked past them down the steps. That evening at the kitchen table, Jasper set a cup of coffee in front of Lenora and sat down across from her. "I told you I would tell you when you made a mistake," he said. She looked up. "Did I make one?" "No. I am telling you this because I want to be clear about the other side of that arrangement." He paused. "Today was not a small thing. What you did in that room. It was logic and documentation," Lenora said. "Those things applied at the right moment with the right courage are not small." He held her gaze. "I want you to know I understand the difference." Lenora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "For what it is worth, I want to be very clear about something. I did not come here to manage your affairs. I came here to be your partner. Today was the same thing." "I know," Jasper said. "I wanted to say it out loud. I know that too." The fire burned in the next room. Upstairs, Emmett was asleep with the bracelet in his coat pocket hanging on the bedpost, and a list of questions about the mountain men of the Rockies that he intended to ask Lenora in the morning. Outside, the February night settled over Salida with its full weight of cold and stars. And somewhere on the eastern edge of Chaffee County, in a large house on a large spread of land that had been acquired with patience and money and the particular discipline of a man who did not abandon objectives when the first approach failed, Silas Drummond sat in his study and began to consider his second approach. He abandoned approaches. He kept objectives, and the objective had not changed. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in the middle of March, 3 weeks after the courthouse. It came with a Boston postmark and a return address that Jasper recognized from something Ruth had mentioned years ago in a way that had made him understand it was not a memory she treasured. Edith Sinclair, Ruth's mother. He read it at the kitchen table with the still face he wore when the thing he had just encountered was in a different category from the things he usually handled. Then he set it down. Lenora, who had been working on the ranch accounts at the other end of the table, looked up at his face and read it before he said a word. She had become, in 6 weeks of marriage, quite precise at reading Jasper Calloway's face, which was not an easy text. What she read now was the specific quality of stillness that meant the thing in front of him required a different kind of attention. She held out her hand for the letter. He gave it to her. Edith Sinclair was Ruth's mother, a widow of means in Boston who had opposed Ruth's marriage from the beginning and had maintained her opposition through near total silence, through the marriage, through Ruth's death, through Emmett's entire childhood. Her absence had been so complete that Emmett barely knew her name. Now she had engaged a Denver lawyer to file for guardianship of Emmett Calloway. Attached to the letter was a notarized document on legal paper from a Boston court. It bore the name Lenora Pemberton, an alleged breach of contract in a commercial dispute from 1882. Lenora read the guardianship letter once. She read the attached document twice. Then she set both papers down on the table with the deliberate placement of someone managing a careful response to a significant provocation. "The guardianship filing is Drummond," she said. Not a question. He knows Edith Sinclair had standing to file. He knew she resented the marriage. He knew she never acknowledged Emmett in 5 years. Jasper's voice was level, but had a quality beneath the level that was not level at all. He gave her a reason and a lawyer. And this. Lenora put her finger on the attached court document. "This is not real." Jasper looked at it again. "How do you know?" "The judge named in the signature block died in 1880. I know this because he was a colleague of my father's and I attended his funeral." She looked at Jasper steadily. "Whoever prepared this document used a name from the public record and did not check whether that person was still living." "Can you prove that?" "With a letter to the Boston Court of Common Pleas. Approximately 2 weeks for the reply." She looked at the guardianship filing again and at the court document. Then she looked at the wall beyond them. The particular place people look when they are thinking about something difficult that they are not going to avoid. "I need to tell you something about the legal situation," she said. Jasper waited. "I have been here 6 weeks. I know that is not long. I know Emmett is still deciding about me. I know I am still learning what this place requires." She looked at him directly. "But I want you to know that this is my home, not because of the legal arrangement between us, because I decided it is, and I am going to fight for it the way I fight for things that are mine." Jasper looked at her for a long time. "I would expect nothing less," he said. Emmett heard them that night, not because he was trying to. He had woken sometime after midnight and gone to get water from the kitchen, a habit of his since he was small. And the low voices from the main room had reached him through the hallway door before he was fully awake enough to identify them as private. He stood in the dark hallway and caught fragments. His name. The name Sinclair, which he connected dimly to something he had once heard about the grandmother who never came to visit. The words Denver lawyer and filing and guardianship. The last of which he did not know, but which sounded in the tone it was spoken like something serious. He went back to his room without his water and lay on his bed in the dark. He was 10 years old, and he was not the kind of child who could put adult legal proceedings into their proper context. But he was also not the kind of child who could hear a conversation about himself and not understand the emotional weight of it. Someone wanted to take him somewhere that was not here. In the morning, he found Lenora at the kitchen table before his father was up. She was writing something in her careful hand, and she looked up when he came in and set down her pen without being asked. He stood in the kitchen doorway. "Mrs. Sinclair wants to take me to Boston." Lenora looked at him without surprise at the directness of it. She had been expecting this conversation since the night before. "She wants to. Your father and I are not going to let that happen." "Why does she want to now?" "She never wanted me before." This was the hardest question. Lenora answered it without flinching, because Emmett deserved the honest answer more than the easy one, because someone told her it would hurt your father. Some people want things not because the thing itself has value to them, but because getting it takes it away from someone else. Emmett absorbed this with his characteristic stillness. Does she have the legal right? She is trying to establish one. She does not have it yet. Can she get it? Not if I can help it. Lenora met his eyes, and I am very good at helping it. Emmett looked at her for a long moment. He was doing the thing he did, the collecting, the assessing. Then he said very quietly, as if testing the words before committing to them, "This is my home." "Yes," Lenora said. "It is." "Then it stays my home." "Yes." He nodded once. The compact, decisive nod that was entirely his father's. Then he went to the sink to pour his water. Then he sat down at the table across from her and said without looking up from his cup, "Will you tell me what you need to do for the legal part? I want to understand it." Lenora looked at this boy for a moment, at the serious set of his shoulders and the careful way he held his cup, and the brown eyes that were already looking at her with a readiness she had not yet earned and that he was offering anyway. Provisionally. The way you offer trust to someone you have decided to believe in before the evidence is complete. She picked up her pen. "I will start from the beginning," she said. The letter from Levi Osgood did not come in an envelope. It came folded inside a copy of the Pueblo Chieftain that Virgil Polk found propped against the back door of his store on a Wednesday morning in late March, 3 days before the guardianship hearing was scheduled to be heard by Judge Whitmore. Virgil recognized the significance of what he was reading and walked the paper to the ranch himself rather than sending it, which told Jasper everything he needed to know about how Virgil had assessed its contents. Levi Osgood had worked for Silas Drummond for 2 years. He was not a bad man in the way that men who choose evil as a philosophy are bad. He was a man who had made a series of incremental accommodations with the wrong employer, each one small enough to justify at the time, until he found himself standing in a barn in Pueblo on the evening of December the 14th, 1883, mixing the wrong substance into the wheel grease of a stagecoach scheduled to depart the following morning. He had been told it would delay the coach, cause a breakdown somewhere in the high country. He had not known how bad the weather would get. Drummond had given the instruction in writing, on his own personal stationery, because Drummond trusted no one to execute correctly without documentation. Levi Osgood had kept the note, tucked in the bottom of a saddlebag. Insurance he never expected to use. What had changed his calculation was that he had seen Lenora Calloway in the courthouse 3 weeks ago sitting beside Jasper with her handwritten page of legal discrepancies, and he had understood clearly for the first time the full weight of what had been risked on that stage road. A woman had nearly died, and the man who had arranged it was now attempting to use the legal system to take a boy away from his home. Levi Osgood had limits after all. He had just taken some time to find them. The note he sent was written in a hand that shook slightly at the beginning of each line and steadied as it continued. It described the instruction Drummond had given, the date, the method, the payment. It described where the original instruction note was hidden, in the lining of a saddlebag currently stored in Drummond's tack room. Osgood did not offer to appear in person. He made no promises about what he would say under oath if it came to that. He said only that he had children of his own, and that he had decided he could not continue to say nothing. Jasper read it at the kitchen table with Virgil sitting across from him and Lenora standing at the window with her back to the room, which was her habit when she was thinking hardest. "He is not offering to testify," Jasper said. "No," Virgil agreed. "This alone is not court evidence." Lenora said it without turning from the window. "It tells you where the original note is." Both men looked at her. She turned around. Drummond's tack room. If Sheriff Holt had cause to look there. She paused. If someone provided him with sworn information sufficient to establish probable cause. Jasper looked at the letter again, Osgood will not swear to anything. He said as much. He said he would not appear in person. He did not say he would not sign a sworn statement provided to him at a location of his choosing. Lenora came to the table and sat down. A signed affidavit from Levi Osgood describing what he did and where the original instruction exists would give Holt his cause. She looked at Jasper. Where is Osgood now? He does not say in the letter. Virgil. Lenora looked across the table. You received this at your store. Was there anything with it that might indicate how it was delivered? Anyone seen near the building? Virgil thought for a moment. My boy said he saw someone by the creek at the back of the lot before dawn, described him as a working man, medium height, on foot. Then he is in Salida or nearby, and he came to you rather than to Jasper or to Holt, which means he does not trust how far Drummond's reach extends into the official structure of this town. She paused. That makes sense, given what I have observed about Deputy Grimes. I know where men like Osgood go when they are uncertain and nearby, Virgil said. He stood up. Give me 2 hours. He was back in 1. Levi Osgood was in a room above the feed store on the south end of Main Street, paying in cash, and he had signed the affidavit within 20 minutes of Virgil Polk sitting down across from him and explaining in Virgil's plain and reasonable way exactly what the situation was and what a single, honest action could accomplish within it. Jasper took the affidavit to Sheriff Holt that afternoon. Holt read it twice. He looked at the ceiling for a moment in the way of a man doing a calculation that involves professional risk. Then he stood up and put on his coat. I am going to need a deputy who is not Grimes for this particular search, he said. Deputy Terrell, Jasper suggested. Terrell was 19 years old and had been Holt's second deputy for 8 months and had not yet developed any inconvenient loyalties beyond the law and the sheriff's office. Deputy Terrell it is. They found the original instruction note exactly where Osgood had described it, sewn into the lining of a saddlebag in Drummond's tack room, entered through a warrant that Judge Whitmore signed that evening. Holt brought Deputy Grimes into his office the following morning and put the note on the desk between them and said nothing. Grimes resigned before noon. The night before the hearing, Jasper sat in the main room of the ranch house with the fire burning and Emmett asleep upstairs and Lenora at the kitchen table writing her final notes for the morning. The house was quiet in a way it had not been quiet before Lenora arrived. Not the silence of insufficient people in a space built for more. The quiet of rest. Of a household in its proper order. Lenora came through to the main room and sat in the chair across from him without a book or her papers, which meant she was done for the night and had come to sit rather than to work. They had developed in 6 weeks a considerable number of practices that had arrived without being discussed or named, and this was one of them. The hour before bed when neither of them required anything of the other except to be in the same room. Are you ready for tomorrow? He asked. Yes. She said it without qualification. He believed her completely. He had learned that Lenora did not say yes to things she was not ready for. She said not yet, or she said what she still needed, or she said nothing and went away and prepared and came back when she was ready. She did not perform readiness as reassurance. When she said yes, it was a statement of fact. Emmett knows what is happening tomorrow, Jasper said. I told him this evening. I know. He came to talk to me afterward. She was looking at the fire. He wanted to know what he should say if they ask him a question in the hearing. What did you tell him? I told him to say the true thing, whatever it was, and not to worry about what anybody needed to hear. She paused. I told him that the truth spoken plainly has a weight that nothing else has. That people can argue with a position, but they cannot argue with a plain fact delivered without performance. They rode to the courthouse together in the morning, the three of them, Jasper and Lenora and Emmett, on horses in the thin March light. The snow still present in the shaded places, but retreating from the open ground. The first hint of what the land would become in another month present in the way the air moved, which was less like a wall and more like a door. Drummond's Denver lawyer was already in the courtroom when they arrived, arranged behind his table with papers sorted and the particular ease of a man who has appeared in unfamiliar courtrooms many times and has learned that confidence is its own kind of argument. He was good. Jasper could see that immediately. The kind of lawyer who made complexity work for him, who could take a simple situation and surround it with enough procedural structure that the simple truth at the center became difficult to see. Edith Sinclair had not come from Boston. She had sent her lawyer and her documentation and her name, which was sufficient for her purposes. Judge Whitmore called the proceeding to order. The Denver lawyer went first. 40 minutes of careful, fluent work. He established Edith Sinclair's standing as Emmett's sole surviving maternal relative. He noted the circumstances of Ruth Calloway's death and the years that followed. He raised with measured delicacy the recent legal uncertainties surrounding the ranch and the question of Lenora Calloway's background in Boston, noting the attached court document. He was measured throughout, never unkind in a way that could be called unkind, simply building a structure brick by brick that looked from a certain angle like the responsible concern of a family member for a child's welfare. And that was in fact the architecture of a campaign designed by a man sitting in the gallery who had already lost 2 direct approaches and was executing his third. Then Sheriff Holt stood up. He did not speak like a lawyer. He had never gone to law school and did not pretend to the cadences of the courtroom. He spoke like a man who has been sheriff of a county for 20 years and who has a piece of evidence in his hand that he would like the court to examine. He placed Drummond's original instruction note on the bench in front of Judge Whitmore. He explained where it had been found, under what warrant, through what chain of information. He explained what it said. He explained that the man who had received this instruction and carried it out had provided a sworn affidavit, which was the second document he placed before the judge. He explained that the result of the action described in those documents was a stagecoach breakdown on the eastern Colorado high country in December of 1883, which had resulted in 1 passenger with a broken arm, 1 with a head laceration, and 1, the woman now known as Lenora Calloway, who had suffered frostbite and near fatal exposure to cold while attempting to seek help for her fellow passengers. He explained that the person who had issued the original instruction and who had subsequently filed the land claim against the Calloway Ranch, and who had subsequently provided Edith Sinclair with both legal representation and a false court document from Boston, was Silas Drummond of Chaffee County, who was present in this courtroom. The room was very quiet. Judge Whitmore looked at the documents for a long time. He looked at Drummond's lawyer, whose expression had moved well past its earlier confidence and arrived somewhere considerably less comfortable. He looked at Drummond, who was sitting in the gallery with the stillness of a man whose discipline was being tested at its absolute limit. Whitmore looked at Jasper, at Lenora, at Emmett sitting between them. Before I address the matter of the guardianship petition, he said, I would like to hear from the child. Emmett stood up. He was 10 years old and he was wearing his best coat and his boots were clean, and he stood at his full height, which was not much, but which he used completely. He looked at Judge Whitmore with his father's directness and his own considered calm. Emmett, Whitmore said. "You understand that the court is trying to determine what is in your best interest. I want to hear from you directly. Where do you want to live?" Emmett said, "I want to stay with my father and with Mrs. Calloway. Can you tell me why?" Emmett was quiet for a moment, not because he was uncertain, because he was choosing his words with the care of someone who has thought about this and wants to say it correctly the first time. "Mrs. Calloway is not my mother," he said. "I know that. She knows that. My mother died and she is not coming back, and nobody is going to replace her." He paused. But Calloway chose to come here. She could have stayed in Boston. She had a life there. She chose this instead." He paused again. "And then she could have gone back. She had reason to go back. She chose to stay instead." He looked at Whitmore steadily. "I think a person who keeps choosing the same thing is telling you something true about what they want. Mrs. Sinclair never chose us. She never came. Not once in 5 years." He stopped. "That is all I have to say." The room was quiet after this, in the way that rooms are sometimes quiet after someone has said something that is plainly and simply true, and that does not require addition or commentary. Judge Whitmore looked at Emmett for a moment. Then he looked at his papers. Then he said the petition for guardianship filed by Edith Sinclair is denied. Emmett Calloway will remain in the custody of his father, Jasper Calloway. He set down his pen. "As to the matter of Mr. Drummond, Sheriff Holt, I believe we will need a separate proceeding." Holt nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." Drummond did not move in the gallery. His face had not changed, but the room had shifted around him in a way that could not be shifted back, and the knowledge was in the quality of his stillness. On the courthouse steps afterward, in the thin, warm light of a March afternoon that was making its best effort at spring, Emmett walked out between Jasper and Lenora, and then, without a word or a signal from anyone, he moved to Lenora's left side and put his hand in hers. Not a child's grab. Not the reflexive contact of a boy needing steadying. A deliberate, considered placing of his hand in hers. The hand of a 10-year-old choosing something in a way that required no interpretation. Lenora looked down at him. She did not speak. She held his hand. Jasper looked at both of them. He looked for a moment too long, and then he looked away at the mountain. And he understood that what he was looking at over his shoulder was the full weight of what he had ridden into the blizzard for, and that it was larger than he had known how to want when he wanted it. Drummond came out 5 minutes later with his lawyer. He walked past them on the steps and stopped when he reached Lenora. Not because he had to, because he chose to. Jasper stepped forward, not dramatically, just enough to be in the man's direct line. Drummond looked at him. Then he said quietly, "Your ranch, Calloway. Your family. You hold them well." "I intend to," Jasper said. Drummond walked down the steps and did not look back. The separate proceeding against Silas Drummond concluded 6 weeks later without fanfare. He faced criminal charges for the deliberate sabotage of the stagecoach and for the forged documents. He had lawyers enough to avoid the worst of it, but not enough to avoid all of it. By the time the proceedings were finished, he had sold the eastern spread and left Chaffee County for somewhere that neither Jasper nor anyone in Salida ever confirmed. Sheriff Holt said only that a man like Drummond carries his punishment with him wherever he goes, which is the nature of men who have built everything on what they can take from others. Jasper did not disagree. Summer came to Salida with the particular generosity of a Colorado high country summer. which is to say briefly and intensely, and with wildflowers that last approximately long enough to make you believe they are permanent before they become the next thing. The eastern pasture, which was still theirs, filled with June grass that came to Thunder's belly. The creek ran full and cold from the snowmelt. Emmett spent every available hour outdoors, on horseback or on foot, ranging the property with the proprietary knowledge of a boy who has grown up on this land and intends to spend the rest of his life improving his understanding of it. Lenora learned to ride. She was not naturally gifted at it, and she did not pretend to be, but she approached it as she approached everything, with patience and careful attention and a refusal to let embarrassment prevent eventual success. By August, she was capable. Jasper did not tell her she was a natural because she was not. He told her she was good, and he meant it, and she heard the difference. She had taken on the bookkeeping for the ranch with a thoroughness that immediately identified 3 places where costs were being absorbed unnecessarily. She had also begun keeping a correspondence with several of the other ranch families in the valley, building the kind of network that makes the difference in hard seasons between the communities that survive and those that do not. Emmett was different now. Lenora had noticed it first. The way his sentences had gotten longer over the spring, the way he volunteered observations at dinner instead of waiting to be asked, the way he stood on the porch in the evenings describing whatever had caught his attention that day with his whole body, arms wide to indicate the wingspan of a hawk, hands cupped to approximate the size of a river stone with a fossil pressed into it. Jasper saw it most clearly on an evening in late June when Emmett was showing Lenora something he had carved from a piece of cottonwood, a small horse with its head turned as though looking back. Lenora held it in both hands and studied it with the same careful attention she gave to legal documents. And Emmett watched her study it with the satisfaction of someone whose work is being taken seriously. In the first week of July, when they had been married 5 months, and the summer was at its height, Lenora told him in the morning before breakfast. Standing at the kitchen window looking out at the early light on the mountains, she said it straightforwardly, in the manner of someone reporting a fact that is also a feeling, that is also a question. Then she turned from the window and looked at him to see how he received it. Jasper was sitting at the table with his coffee cup between his hands. The morning light was behind her, and the kitchen was warm, and she was wearing the gray-blue pioneer dress that she still wore for household work because she had an attachment to it that she had explained once in a way he understood completely. It was the dress she had worn through the worst of it, and it had come through. And things that have come through the worst with you deserve to be kept and used rather than put away. January, he said, because he was calculating. Dr. Abernathy thinks so, around the new year. He stood up from the table and came to her and stood in front of her. And for a moment, he just looked at her face in the morning light, at the particular steadiness of her, the composure that was not distance but presence. The quality he had read in her letters and found in the months since to be as consistently real as anything he had ever encountered in a person. He put his hand against her face and she leaned into it, slightly, just slightly, in the particular way of a woman who does not lean easily. And so when she does, it means something. Good, he said. That is very good. Emmett received the news that evening with the gravity appropriate to the occasion. The list he began making of names that same night on the back of a page of arithmetic was found by Lenora 2 days later and featured 17 entries, several of which she could not identify as names in any language she was familiar with. She kept the list. She intended to keep it for a long time. The months that followed were the months in which Jasper learned what it was to be afraid of something that had not happened yet. The fear was different from grief. It was the grief of what had not yet occurred. which is in some ways sharper because imagination has no limits that experience has. He said none of this. He made sure the house was warm and the medical supplies were current and Dr. Abernathy had been consulted. He did what he could with his hands and his presence. Emmett found him on the porch one evening in November, sitting in the cold with no particular purpose, which was not a thing Jasper did. The boy sat down beside him without being invited. In the way he did things now, the way of someone who had learned that this family did not require invitation for the simple act of presence. "You are thinking about when Mother died," Emmett said. "Yes, Mrs. Calloway is not sick." "No, she is not." "You went and got her in time," Emmett said. "This time you were there." He paused, looking out at the dark where the cattle were settled and the mountains were invisible behind the cloud cover. "I think that is important, that you were there." Jasper was quiet for a long time. "She is not the kind of person who stops," Emmett said. He was using Lenora's own words from the letter, from the phrase that had been in circulation in the Calloway household long enough now to have taken on the status of a fixed point, a thing everybody in the house knew was true. "She told me that herself, and I believe her." Jasper put his arm around his son's shoulders, and Emmett leaned against him in the easy way of a boy who has reached the age where he pretends not to need this, but does not actually pretend very hard. They sat on the porch in the cold together until it was time to go in. Hollis Calloway arrived on the 2nd of January, 1885, in the small hours of a night that was cold and clear outside and warm with lamplight inside. Dr. Abernathy and Hazel were both present. Jasper sat outside the closed bedroom door for 4 hours, listening to the sounds on the other side of it with the focused attention of a man trying to read a language he does not speak. Through the door, he heard Lenora say clearly and calmly in the voice she used when she was addressing something directly rather than around its edges. "Hazel, if something goes wrong, make sure Jasper knows I have no regrets about any of it," Hazel said with the sharpness of a woman who has heard too many people preparing for outcomes that were not going to happen. "Nothing is going wrong. You are going to stop talking about things going wrong and focus on what is happening." There was a pause. "You are right. I apologize. You can apologize later. Breathe now." Emmett, who had been asleep until the house went to a different kind of awake, and who had come downstairs and taken up a position on the steps 3 stairs above the floor, sat with Jasper and did not speak for most of those hours. And Jasper was grateful for the company in the way he was often grateful for Emmett, for the steady quality of the boy's presence, for the fact that he had learned how to be beside someone without requiring anything of them. At some point, Emmett said quietly, "She is not going to stop. She told me once that the most important thing about a person is whether they quit when it gets hard. She does not quit." He paused. "She will be all right." When Dr. Abernathy opened the bedroom door and looked at Jasper with the expression of a man delivering the result of something that had gone correctly, Jasper stood up from the wall he had been leaning against and walked into the room with the deliberateness of someone who is aware that this is a moment he will remember in specific detail for the rest of his life. Lenora was propped against the pillows, exhausted and present and stripped down to her most essential self by effort. Her hair was damp against her forehead. She had never looked more like Lenora Pemberton than she did at this moment, which is to say, she had never looked more real. She was holding a bundle that made sounds. Hollis Calloway was red and small and expressed his feelings about the world with considerable energy. "He looks like you," Lenora said. Jasper looked at the child's face. "He looks like himself." "Yes," she said, "he does." Emmett appeared in the doorway at a speed that was below running, but only slightly. He stood with his hands at his sides, looking at the bundle with the expression of someone encountering a thing that is smaller than expected and more significant than the size would suggest. "Emmett," Lenora said, "come meet your brother." Emmett crossed the room. He stood beside the bed and looked down at Hollis for a long time in the thorough way he looked at everything important. "He is very small." "He will get bigger," Jasper said. "I know." Emmett looked at Lenora, then at the baby, then at his father. "I am going to teach him everything," he said, in the matter-of-fact way of someone for whom this is not a sentiment but a plan. "I expect you will," Lenora said. On the 5th of January, 1885, which was the anniversary of the day Jasper had found Lenora in the snow, they rode out together to the line shack. Jasper had suggested it, and Lenora had agreed without the need for explanation, because by this point they knew each other well enough that some things did not require the labor of words. Hollis was at the ranch with Hazel, who had arrived that morning with a pie and an expression that made it clear she had not been asked because she had volunteered. Emmett rode alongside on his own horse, included in the outing in the way he was included in most things, not as a concession, but as a member. Jasper built a fire in the small stove, not for warmth, because the January day was clear and manageable, but because the place required it, because certain rooms are not themselves without the particular quality of light and heat that fire provides. They sat in the doorway on the step where the sun came in from the south. Emmett had gone exploring the creek bed 30 yards away, turning over rocks with the systematic interest of someone cataloging the natural world. His voice came to them occasionally when he found something worth reporting. "Are you afraid of anything now?" Lenora asked. She was looking out at the snow-covered meadow where the winter grasses stood in pale clusters above the white. "Different things," Jasper said. He thought about it honestly, which was how he thought about things she asked him directly. "Afraid of not having enough time. Afraid of the things I have not said yet." She looked at him. "Then say them." He looked at her in the winter light, at the gray-blue dress that had been through more with them than any piece of clothing had a right to, at the face he had been reading for a year now, and that still surprised him regularly, which he had come to understand was not a sign of opacity, but of depth. "I fell in love with you in the third letter," he said. "The one where you listed everything you could not do before you listed what you could. I had never read anything that honest from someone I had never met." He paused. "I have never stopped since." Lenora was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone thinking about how to respond, but the silence of someone receiving something and letting it settle properly before speaking. "I fell in love with you in the fourth letter," she said, "the one about Emmett and the bracelet. You did not ask me to care about that. You just told me because you thought I should know, because you were trusting me with the real shape of your life, before you knew if I was worth trusting with it." She looked at him. "That was the bravest thing anyone has ever done for me." He reached across and took her hand. She held it in both of hers. They sat together in the doorway of the small shack where a year ago he had wrapped her in blankets, and she had told him she was more afraid of him than of dying. And the fire behind them put its warmth into the cold air around them, and Emmett's voice came across the meadow reporting the discovery of a frozen pond of some significant size. That evening, after Hollis was fed and Emmett was in bed and the ranch house had settled into its night sounds, Lenora sat at the kitchen table with a lamp and a piece of writing paper and composed a letter. It was addressed to a Miss Josephine Alcott of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. In response to an inquiry about a teaching position at the informal school Lenora had been organizing in the valley, lessons for the children of the scattered homesteads whose distance from Salida made regular schooling impractical. Josephine Alcott was 24 years old and had written a letter that Virgil Polk, who had placed the advertisement in a Philadelphia paper at Lenora's request, had brought to the ranch with an expression that suggested he found the inquiry notable for reasons he could not entirely articulate. Lenora had read it twice. Then she had set it down and looked at Jasper across the kitchen table with a very particular expression. She says she is looking for a life with meaning in the West. She says she is not afraid of hard work. She says she is a quick learner and does not quit. A pause. Lenora. I know, she said. I know. At the bottom of the page, in the last paragraph, she wrote, "The work here is real, and the winters are serious, and there is no library within convenient distance. But if you come prepared for what it is, rather than what you imagined, you will find that the place and the people in it tend to be worth the effort. If your stagecoach is ever delayed, someone will come and find you. That is the kind of country this is." She folded the letter and addressed it and set it on the corner of the table to go with the morning mail. Jasper, reading over her shoulder because she permitted this now without comment, looked at the last paragraph. "You did not tell her about the stagecoach," he said. "She does not need to know the specifics. She needs to know the principle." He looked at the letter for another moment. "That is a good principle." "I know," Lenora Calloway said. "It kept me alive." She put out the lamp, and they went to bed. And outside, the Colorado night settled over the ranch with its full weight of stars and cold, and the permanence of mountains that have been standing long before any of the small human stories at their feet, and will stand long after. While down below, in the warm rooms of a house built by a man's hands on land he had chosen and claimed and held, the people inside it slept. For the first time in a long time, the house had the right number of people in it.